Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about Jive G. And the reason why we're going to talk about Jive G today is because yesterday I read an amazing post by a subscriber named Aver Life in the comments section of yesterday's video. And the comment contained an epiphany that first in the Bible, Moses raised up the copper as a cure to the copper serpents that were punishing the Hebrews for begging God to go back to Egypt. And then later in history, Jesus compared himself to that copper serpent on a pole, and Jesus' feet were of copper, weren't they? And he was raised up on the cross. Now, I'm believing that his feet were probably bronze, because that's where he was bruised by the bronze serpent. He was bruised on the feet, the heels. This is why you get foot washing in the Bible as part of Jesus' ministry, dusting off the cursed dust off of the feet. This is what he told his disciples to do if they weren't accepted in the town during their ministry. They were to dust their feet off and go to the next town. This was all symbolic as well as real. He was telling them to wash away the cursed dust. And then Aver Life realized this really amazing metaphor, that now the enemy in our contemporary times is trying to raise himself above the Most High once again by lifting up the serpent in the form of copper Jive G, raising up the serpent on a pole. Now, the prince of the power of the airwaves, or the poles, is what this is really about. And we had discussed a little bit of this previously, that copper Jive G towers and base stations are full of copper, aren't they? 75,000 tons of copper is what is housed in these base stations all across America for Jive G. The copper snake-like wiring raised up on a pole, just like in ancient times. But not quite. Let's back up here for a second. Because 4G had the coaxial copper cables raised on a pole. Let me show you a picture of that. This is 4G, and they had the copper coaxial cables going up the pole, and then Jive G switched over to fiber optic. Now there's a power cable there, and that could have some copper in it, I don't know, but this is what we're dealing with, and we'll get into a little bit about this more later as the show progresses here. But there is a connection here, and it's undeniable that this is what is happening. Now, you'll notice these poles are likely metaphors, aren't they? They're likely metaphors for trees. Let's go back to this image here. Metaphors for trees, because they look like a tree, don't they? This is the older technology with the copper coaxial cables going up the pole, and here's the new technology, the fiber optic going up the pole. There is a power cable. Now we'll talk about that and what that really means as we get into this, into more of the shows. But what an amazing revelation, right? Now we know that many of these towers, just to confirm the tree aspect to this, many of these towers are actually disguised as artificial trees, aren't they? Now, let's go over some of the copper components inside of these base stations. Here's one. It's a coiled copper ring, as you can see here. Pure copper. Gives you an idea of the amount of copper that would be necessary to build all these base stations. Here's another copper component. These are copper conductive columns for Jive G base stations. Once again, so you can see these here. And here's another copper component. This is called a skived radiator for high power Jive G base stations. Once again, let's play this video, see what this looks like. There's some kind of cooling device. So yes, a lot of copper components. So now you're starting to get an idea of what's really going on here with copper and how this points right back to the Bible. And they know this is about the copper. Why? Look at this 2018 article about the Jive G chip. This was at the beginnings of the technology. And they show the size comparison of this chip next to none other than a copper penny. Now, coppers are only about 2 or 3% coated. I mean, pennies are only about 2 or 3% coated copper now, but they used to be solid copper. And so there's a reason why they use this copper penny to demonstrate the size, because they know that this is what this would be all about. Now, let's take a look at some of these Jive G towers and the base stations. And if you look here, down here, this is what the base station looks like. One of you actually sent me pictures. Connor, I think his name was, sent me pictures from England of these base stations. Some are small, some are big, some are in an array. So there's several of these cabinets. They look like cabinets. And some base stations are really large. They look like a small shed or something. But this base station is where all the copper is. And in the older technology, in 4G, the copper actually went up the pole. But something strange happened. When they went from 4G to Jive G, something strange happened. Because the serpent copper turned into optical fiber. And a particular scripture comes to mind. When the serpent transformed himself into an optic cable. I'm going to go back in the chat and see who gets the scripture. Who understands and remembers the scripture that seems to be a metaphor, or seems to be the fulfillment of prophecy for the serpent transforming himself? I just gave it away pretty much right there. Transforming himself into a fiber optic cable. Let's see who gets it. Tom says fiber optic light. Yes, he's giving a clue there. See who can spell out most of the scripture. Yes, Q&A time. Garrett says, poke out thine eyes. Not quite. Prince of the power of the air. That's one, but I'm looking for one that's more specific. Angel of light. Yes, create adult. The enemy shall transform himself into an angel of light. And it's exactly what he's done. Looking at this side-by-side picture of the old technology and the new technology. The serpent copper. Now, why do I call the copper serpent? Not only is this coaxial cable going up on the pole, just like the serpent was raised up on a pole, but the word for copper is nakasheth, which sounds exactly like or very similar to the word nakash for serpent. They're almost the same words. Those words also mean unclean. So you have unclean, copper, and serpents all pretty much meaning the same word in the ancient language. Now, let's keep going with this, because there are more. Just my mind was blown yesterday when I dug into this and decided to dig into this, because I was not expecting to find what I did. Let's get into some more of these specific components to the copper inside of these base stations. Let's read this next article here. Now, this article is called Fiber Optic and requirements in Jive G infrastructure. It says here, they improve upon legacy copper systems in terms of reliability, cost, speed, security, and bandwidth. It's fiber optics that make high-speed wireless networks possible. In fact, it can transmit up to, fiber can transmit up to 40 miles and still retain its signal strength. So they're replacing the copper, but as you see down here, they're saying that it's lighter than copper and all this. But they don't tell you is the base stations need the copper. Copper wire-based transmission depends on electrical signals passed through the cable. Fiber optics transmits signals in the form of light from one point to another. And this is where we get into the new technology and the dependence still on copper with these base stations. Vapor chamber cooling. This article, the challenge of thermal management, Jive G. Let's read it down here about what role copper plays. Vapor chamber cooling. Copper plates can help dissipate heat by dispersing it towards the bottom of PCBs. This isn't 100% effective, as there are still hot spots to contend with. Very thin vapor chambers sandwiched between two copper plates between a liquid cavity can help. As the liquid heats up, it vaporizes, which dissipates the heat before condensing back into a liquid. Heat transfer thermal management of electronics can be effective. This involves thermal surface materials, which come in different formulations and formats. These materials transfer heat energy away from the components to heat sink, but here again, EMI can become a problem. So the heat sinks should be made of copper or aluminum. So copper plays a huge part in the base station wiring as well as the cooling of the base station so that the whole thing doesn't go up in flames. Now, Connor sent some images from some real base stations in the UK. These are the cabinets that they're stored in. It says radio transmitters. Please obey all further signage. Here's a wider shot of it. Thanks, Connor, for getting us this information. Now, if you don't know, if you don't live in the UK, you probably don't know that one of the major networks is called 3. 3 is the name of one of the major mobile networks. But look at this. Almost looks like it's some kind of a dragon or something. And this cell phone network called 3 came online on March 3rd, 2003. So 333 is when this came online. There's some instructions on the back of this cabinet here. Here's a wide angle shot of the base stations, full of copper. Remember, lots of copper infrastructure necessary for the base stations. Here's another shot of it. Thanks, Connor, for sending us these pictures. Connor was doing his diligence here on the down low, secretly recording these images. I mean, look at this thing. It's just standing in plain sight, towering over the neighborhood. And if you didn't know this, many more towers are needed for Jive G because of the nature of the frequencies compared to 4G and other older technology who basically were able to have towers much further apart. So we're going to be surrounded by this stuff. Here's another shot of it just sitting right there out on the corner. Now, I'm going to read you the rest of what Averlife had said in their comment. Brass is mainly an alloy that consists of copper with zinc added. They then quoted Ephesians 2:2, wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Numbers 21:9. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass, that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. And then they ask, does this tie into the image of the beast? Does Jive G target those who are not chipped is Jive G part of this image? If you've had the smack scene, will you need to remain in proximity to the copper on the polar tree? These are questions. And then quoted is Revelation 13:15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Now, you can imagine that this system has the ability to process data in real time, project images, and everything else. So you can imagine that this could be a component of a future deception, the image of the beast. Now, I'm going to check in with you guys, and then we're going to do the last and most important part of this show. This is the part that just blew me away. Because we're going to talk about how copper fits in to mimicry or cloning, disguises, and camouflage. Because that's what the enemy does, doesn't he? He is a camouflage or a counterfeit of the original. He copies God's creation. He mimics God. And through his mimicry, he erodes faith and causes confusion, doesn't he? Now, I want to be clear about this before we get into the last part of the show. Jesus is not a snake. He wasn't comparing himself to the snake on the pole. The snake on the pole was a punishment, well, it was a cure for a punishment, but God was teaching them a lesson because they were begging and begging. If you go back and read the entire verse about what happened to the ancient Hebrews and why they got attacked with fiery serpents and why a pole was raised up, a blue-blooded snake pole, it was because it was all about punishment. Okay? Whereas Jesus came with love, didn't he? And mercy and grace. Those two are opposites of one another. Punishment versus grace. And that's why Jesus said, and if you read the scripture, he doesn't compare, he's not comparing himself. It says, as Moses lifted up a serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. He's comparing both being lifted up, that whoever believeth in him should not perish. He wasn't saying he was the serpent. And a lot of people get confused about that. And they try to like go, that's weird. Why would he? Think about it. Moses and Aaron were in the court of the pharaohs and went up against Janus and Jambres, J&J, didn't they? And Aaron threw down a staff and it turned into a snake. Well, God isn't like some snake monger. He was proving a point. He was basically showing up the Pharaoh, revealing and exposing his false snake god, which is the snake that comes out of their forehead that they have in their headdresses. He was exposing it. That's why he made it turn into a snake. That's why he did it. You have to read between the lines in the Bible. And it all falls on where your heart is. If your heart is doubtful of God and you're looking for things to try to go, see, gotcha, then God will let you see that. If that's what you want to see and you don't want to have faith and you believe the mimicry of the enemy, then God will allow you to do that and fall under that delusion because your heart is not in the right place. My heart serves the Most High and I believe in his Son. So I'm always going, there's got to be a logical explanation for that. And when you really think about it, there always is a logical explanation for doubtful verses in the Bible. There always is. So, Jesus, think of it this way. When Jesus came, he corrected the blue blood. He reversed the copper-based blood with his own pure blood of the woman. The red iron-based blood. It's pretty simple if you know everything and you can actually try to think things through. And it requires some research. It requires the path that we went on, that you're not going to hear when you go to the pulpit, because the pulpit doesn't know all of this stuff because they're under their own delusion. And so It is only through research of the Bible and studying to show yourself approved that you begin to fully understand why God would tell Moses to raise a serpent up on a pole to cure people. If you take the third grade version of it, then you'll just think that's weird and, that's kind of weird. God would use a snake to cure people, but you got to think this through. You got to think deeper. Blue blood snake versus red blood Christ. The cure, the true cure, not a punishment, grace, belief in him. Those are the bullet points. And it makes perfect sense. And God's wisdom is infinite. It's amazing. So, let's get into the bombshell for the rest of the show. For those of you that showed up, this is nuts. So, I was watching a video of how octopus can camouflage themselves within seconds. This happens. And if you've never seen this before, you need to go on to YouTube and look up camouflage octopus and watch an octopus swim along the bottom of the ocean and change their colors to almost identically match the sea floor or the coral or the sand or whatever it is they are swimming across. So I looked into this because we've been talking a lot about blue blood, haven't we? And hemocyanin-based blood, which are all these creatures like these octopus, squid, cuttlefish, all these creatures of the deep are hemocyanin-based creatures, copper-based blood. So I was like, okay, this has to be connected because the enemy also camouflages himself. He's a mimic. He's a clone. So this is what I found. I looked into how this worked. An octopus, because of their copper blood running through their veins, are able to control the pigment in their skin using electrical impulses. They can actually turn the color in each individual cell on or off or different shades. And the skin cells are called chromatophores, as you can see here. So, it was to my shock that I discovered this. Copper and pigmentation of skin and hair. Let me read this for you so you can understand this. The pigment of your skin is dependent on copper. Pronounced changes occur in the color of the fur of black or hooded rats that consume an excessive milk diet low in copper. A progressive disease in the amount of pigmentation occurred as a dietary regimen continued until finally the coat became silvery gray. So the pigment in the hair of these rats diminished when they had a diet low in copper. The administration of iron to the animals had no effect on the condition, but the feeding of a small amount of copper promoted a prompt restoration of the normal color of the fur. Almost simultaneously, another investigator demonstrated by actual analysis that the copper content of the skin of black rats and rabbits usually exceeded that of otherwise comparable white animals. Further studies suggest that copper might serve as a catalyst in the formation of pigment. Now, let's keep going with this. Copper deficiency in the skin. Pale skin. Color is greatly determined by the pigment melanin. I got some melanin in my skin, being of mixed race. People with lighter skin have fewer and smaller, lighter melanin pigments than people with darker skin. Interestingly, copper is used by enzymes that produce melanin. So, I'm not saying that us people of color are serpents. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that copper actually controls the amount of melanin in your skin. So if you don't have copper, your skin isn't going to be as dark. Now, here's where the plot thickens. Copper is used by an enzyme called tyrosinase. We're going to call it tyro for short, because it's a hard word to say. And basically, tyrosinase, or tyro, is what regulates melanin. It actually produces the melanin. It says here, oxidase, that is the rate-limiting enzyme for controlling the production of melanin. So, no copper, no melanin, and your skin goes pale. This is why we all need trace amounts of copper in our diet, but too much will poison you. So now, those old copper tone ads make all the sense in the world, don't they? Because in order to get the tone, the tyro, you need copper. And they know that. They know that a good tan is all about a little bit of copper. Now, tyro is not only found in humans and animal skin, it's also found in plants and fungus as well. And look at this. Here we are in the tyrosinase, tyro Wikipedia page, and lo and behold, tridimensional structure of a functional unit from octopus hemocyanin. This is right out of the blood of the octopus. Look at the structure, the three-dimensional structure of this thing. Right there in the octopus blood. Now, this was the confirmation for me that we were on the right track with digging into this. Now, those that genetically have less tyro have lighter skin. So, copper tyro brings us full circle back to the octopus, doesn't it? Ready for this? Here's an article on how the octopus works. And in fact, it says here, in addition to confusing predators through color and texture changes, the octopus has a secret weapon, ink. An ink sac is located near its digestive system, and when necessary, the octopus can eject ink out of the sac along with a burst of water from the funnel. The combination creates a black cloud. The octopus can shoot the ink out in little blobs that serve as decoys, or it can shoot it out in one big mass to obscure a quick getaway. To top it off, the ink contains tyrosinase, a compound that impairs smell and taste, which further confuses the predator. Are you kidding me? Smell and taste is what the tyro causes. Now this is getting creepy, because what happens to people who get vidco? They lose their smell and taste. Now I couldn't find anywhere in anything that links tyro to the smack scenes, but what if the mechanisms are similar? Why are people losing smell and taste? And why is that the same exact thing that happens when a squid shoots off ink into a predator? What is it about your nerves, your taste buds, and your smell receptors that's being affected? So, what about the octopus skin cloaking technology? The chromatophore skin cells. Is there copper tyrosinase in the skin? And the answer is yes. Because as we read earlier, tyrosinase is the enzyme behind skin pigmentation, and this article seems to acknowledge the presence of tyrosinase in the octopus cloaking system of the skin. Let's read this. I chose to, let me give you the source here, the chemistry of biological camouflage. I chose to do a chemistry of biological camouflage because I was always interested in how an octopus or chameleon change color. Biological camouflage comes in many different forms. There's self-decoration, motion camouflage, and even disruptive coloration. Although these are interesting, process of how a chameleon skin changes color was far more interesting. Therefore, I decided to do a project on changeable skin camouflage. Composition of. There are two different processes for changeable skin camouflage. One process is for vertebrate ectotherms, such as fish, frogs, and lizards. The other is for cephalopods, aka cuttlefish, squid, and octopi. Now, before we keep reading here, you'll remember that we've been covering the weed, which is the tear in the Bible, and people narrowed it down to one specific plant, Cephalaria. What are the odds that the tear mentioned in the Bible is likely the same word as a cephalopod, which is an unclean fish? Cuttlefish, squid, and octopus. What are the odds? Now, the word cephalo is supposed to mean head, or the top of, or the head of something. But you get these weird things that seem to suggest that there's something more to this. Now, let's keep reading here. Even though the processes are different, they both have similar components. Both contain chromatophores, which are cells in the skin. These chromatophores consist of different components. For example, vertebrate chromatophore cells have iridophores and melanophores. Iridophores are colorless, stackable plates that scatter light to create blue, green, white, and ultraviolet hues. Melanophores are black. They have huge impact on the vertebrate process. The melanophore in the chromatophore cell consists of melanin, a chemical made by tyrosine. Tyrosine's chemical formula is blah, blah, blah. The composition of melanin is dioxy whatever. And it says here, these components all make up the inside of chromatophore cell in vertebrates ectotherm. Now, we get into the cephalopods, because we were talking about vertebrates. Now we're getting into the cephalopods. Not only have chromatophores and iridophores, they also have leucophores. So they contain the tyrosinase technology, just like the vertebrates do, but they also have the leucophores too, which contain guanine. Guanine is in bat droppings, another unclean animal. Guanine is in bat droppings. You know, it's crazy. When I was in college, all guys want to have a band, don't they? And we would do like live mic night. My friend could play the guitar, I would sing, and we had these dreams of becoming a band. Guess what the name of our band was? I understand this was when I was in college. This was 30-something years ago. Guano. Think about how things have come full circle. Think about how the steps that you take through your life end up helping you to solve things later in life. That God can turn dark parts of your life into truth and shed the light on the darkness, can't he? And so this guanine has become one of the, this is actually one of the elements of DNA. One of the parts of DNA. It's the G in DNA sequence. What is it? There's G, there's Gattaca. Remember Gattaca, the movie? Well, that's all of the, not enzymes, what are they? Proteins that make up DNA. So G, A, T, C. Those are the I keep saying enzymes, proteins that make up DNA. And so guanine is one of those. And you have to ask yourself, is guanine the part of our DNA that is unclean? But here's the crazy thing. You have these shellfish, and they are full of guanine, aren't they? But it's guanine that is part of the process of making a pearl. So out of the unclean, God can make something clean. And that is where Jesus comes in. He is the gap. He is the bridge to the gap. We did a full video on guanine. And these, we were looking at, what were we looking at? I'm trying to go from memory here. We were looking at scallops. And scallops are amazing creatures. Let me look at some pictures of scallops here. So you can see the eyes of these creatures in the wild. Look at this. Now, understand that the pearl doesn't, I don't believe the pearl has the guanine in it. The pearl is actually made up of calcium. But the reason why the eyes of this scallop look like this, and they're all along the ridge of the scallop, is from guanine. And of course, there's lots of guanine that actually causes the coloration on the inside of the shell, that shimmery kind of image on the inside of the shell. You'll see it also in other larger shellfish. When you open the shell, that shimmer is the guanine. Now, it's weird because we see this shimmer in different movies, don't we? There was a movie, science fiction movie, that came out not too long ago, in which you saw the shimmery, rainbowy kind of field that came over the people. Maybe you guys can help me in the chat with that movie. And so that is the guanine part of all DNA on our planet. Now, this is a whole nother rabbit hole that I'm not going to go into today about DNA, but this gives you some clues, doesn't it? And inside is the pearl. This is the clean. Now, how do we know pearls are clean? Well, because heaven's gates will be made out of pearls. God would not allow anything unclean to be in heaven's gates, would he? The pearl gates at the different, I think there were 12 gates in the New Jerusalem, and each one had a pearl as a door in the book of Revelation. So, there's something to this. Jesus bridges the gap. Out of the unclean, he can make the clean, the pearl. Do not throw your pearls before swine. What is that about? Well, swine are unclean. Do not throw the clean before the unclean. Is this all starting to come together now? Amazing. Now let's keep looking at this. Where were we? Okay. So, cephalopods have the tyrosinase, don't they? They have this copper tyrosinase. Now, the last question we have when I go back to the chat here is, are the enhanced cloaking abilities of the octopus because of their hemocyanin copper-based blood? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. So we've solved another piece of the puzzle. The cloaking of the enemy. The cloning. The counterfeit. Now, you notice I didn't say octopus are bad, or this is bad, or that's are bad. This is all spiritual symbolism. And it's also to help you understand the truth about God's creation. The glory of God comes out of his creation if we simply look. If we simply look and see, then he is glorified through his creation. But many people fail to connect the dots for one reason or another. Okay, let's go into the chat here. That's about all I wanted to present to you guys today. I'll put links to all of this in the pinned comment, as always. It will always be there, so you can dig deeper if you'd like. I barely touched on some of these articles, but there's probably a lot more good information in them. I know a lot of you like to check my work, and I appreciate that. Yes, Sabbath here. The movie is called Annihilation, with the whole shimmering thing. It was like this rainbow shimmery surface that had covered all the people that were exploring this anomaly that was on Earth. And so this is what it's about. If you ever got your hands on an abalone shell, they have very brilliant shimmery surface inside the shell of an abalone, and that comes from guanine. You can look that up. All right. So what could be the implications of copper being responsible for the melanin content in our skin? That is a good question. What could be the spiritual meaning of that? What could be the physical meaning of that? I don't know. We're going to have to think that through. Now, this brings in all kinds of other stuff, doesn't it? Remember Michael Jackson, his skin condition? Well, I was reading into that as well. And it has to do with some kind of, defect in the tyrosinase in people's skin. This is where age spots come from as well. It's almost like a remnant or a clue that our entire human race has been infected, isn't it? It's a clue of the infection. And the answer, the cure, is Jesus. Now, I truly believe in a supernatural transformation once you give your life to Jesus. And I believe that some of it is physical as well. But at the end of the day, even if that wasn't the case, he can still be the cure, because he will end this creation, won't he? He will end the creation. Now, many people believe that death is necessary to be in the spirit, to be with Jesus, that we all have to die. I think I pretty much believe that too. And so, even at the end, when he lights this place up and it's engulfed in fire, we're all going to die. He needs the fire to purify creation. Think about it. Purification is fire. And that's why he's going to come with fire. And all the old dust, all of the cursed dust will be incinerated. And then we will be with him in the spirit, won't we? And so, why would he destroy everything with fire? Well, because you have to get rid of the cursed creation. We're all tainted. We're infected. And through Jesus and the promise and having faith, we're saved through that, aren't we? So then we get to be remade. Remade without the infection. To me, it makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And this is why, it saddens me sometimes, because some people get defensive when we talk about blue bloods and red bloods. This is not meant to divide people and get people pointing fingers at each other. This is what burns me out about some people who get hung up on the race and who gets to run the spiritual show because of your race. This is why you don't hear me talking about that. That's division. Jesus came for all of us, Jews and Gentiles. We're all saved through belief in him. If you believe. This isn't about who gets saved and who doesn't based on your bloodline. If that's what you think, you're totally missing the message here. People ask me about RH. I say, you know what? Does it really matter? Does RH really matter? It'll probably matter for the elite controllers who are, inbreeding the bloodlines so they can have more power, more supernatural abilities and deceive us. Yeah, it'll matter for them, but not for all of us. We're all in this together. Probably shouldn't use that term, but, because that's what they use. But we are really here with this, aren't we? All of us are here, regardless of your bloodline. None of us are in control of anything. So all that really matters is Jesus. Because we're all, I believe, tainted. After all this time of this tainted blood being, going through the bloodlines, all of us, most of us have been touched by it. The only bloodline that we know remain pure, for a matter of fact, is the seed of the woman, right? Which is Jesus' seed. That's the only seed that we know, for a matter of fact, that was not tainted, because Jesus went through his bloodline, didn't he? 14 generations, 14 generations, and 14 generations. None of them mixed with the other seeds. They didn't mix with the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Philistines. They stayed separate from them, and that's why God told them to stay separate under that covenant. That was a specific covenant for the seed of the woman, not a covenant for all of us. I hope people understand that too. That was a specific covenant to protect the seed of the woman so that Jesus could be born. It's like a Terminator movie. John Connor had to be born in order to take down Skynet. What do you think's happening now, you guys? Jesus Christ had to be born to take down Skynet. What is Skynet? Jive G. Here we are. Unbelievable. So, the enemy tried to go back in time, mimic Christ, mimic God. Remember all the Terminator movies where these things would mimic everything and you couldn't tell who was friend and who was foe? And in the history books, you read about all this and people get confused. They're like, no, the Egyptians were millions of years old. The Bible's not real because the Bible only says 6,000 years old. And dinosaurs were millions of years. And da-da-da-da. And this is because the enemy has mimicked everything. He came up with the cult of Tammuz, which is a mimicry of Christ again before Christ was even born. And the Osiris cult before Christ was born. These were Terminator going back in time spiritually because the enemy knew the plan from the beginning. He knew the seed of the woman and the serpent would be raging against one another. He knew it. He knew the plan from Genesis. So what would you do? You're Satan. You just got cast out of heaven. And God said, you're trapped there. You're cursed to eat dust days of your life. What would you do if you were the enemy? You would try to find a way to copy what God was about to do, wouldn't you? So you would come up with the cult of Osiris. You would build pyramids. You would basically try to copy Christ before Christ was born, wouldn't you? And then down through history, people would get really confused. They'd be like, wait, is God real? Because this doesn't seem to jive with the Bible. And look, it's working. It's working. So many people have lost faith because the enemy was able to change times and laws and trick people and get them scratching their head and wondering and guessing and having no faith. So, crazy times we live in, you guys. Crazy times. All of this is being revealed in the last days. And so, don't get hung up on RH negative people, the blue bloods. Because, let's say, even if you were, that doesn't matter one lick. Now, I will tell you this. Cain, whose name is Cayenne, which sounds like cyan, which is blue, who was also marked by God. He was probably the first blue blood, right? And God told him, you may be predisposed to sin. Sin is crouching at the door for you. So maybe people who have more of the blue blood maybe are predisposed to the enemy and the sin. And you have to fight that in your life. And God told him, you have to choose to do good. It might not be in you to be good. Now, we have all run into people like this. We've run into people who are just predisposed to badness from the time they were children. They just were bad. And there was no specific reason for it. They drove their parents nuts, got into trouble. Many of them have a death wish. You know, I've seen people like that. I've run into people like this in my life. And then I've run into other people who are angels. The sweetest, kindest people you could ever meet. My great-grandmother was one of those people. When my mother wasn't around, she prayed for me. I fell off the swing one time, and she prayed for me. And she was always praying. When no one was around to see, she was praying. She fed me. She taught me all these things. So, don't get hung up on what blood you have running inside of you. It doesn't matter. All that matters is your belief in Jesus. That's all that matters. Anyway, you guys, I'm glad you guys all joined here on Friday, and we'll be back here on probably the weekend. I got some headlines already pulled up. Let me give you a little snapshot into what we are going to look at tomorrow or Sunday. We got an update on Sob Gaggett, and it's getting more and more apparent that the story that they told everybody is probably not what really happened. The family, so the real question is here, why is the family trying to sweep this away? They're actually trying to put a gag order on his results. Why would the people who claim to love him be trying to hide what happened to him? My guess is they're trying to preserve his legacy because they know the truth about maybe some of the things he might have done, and they just want this all to go away. We also have more shark attacks. We were just talking yesterday, weren't we, on this channel, or the day before. What would happen if these sharks all got turned on? Remember that? We were just talking about this, you guys. What would happen if these sharks just turned on? Because we were looking at videos and talking about videos of people who put drones up in the air over beaches, and that they saw that regularly there are half a dozen great white sharks on any given beach swimming around under people's feet without their knowledge. And they were able to document this. You can go on YouTube right now and look that up. And so we were talking about that, and then all of a sudden, here's a Sydney Beach shark attack. They hadn't had one in 60 years. Something's happening, you guys. We've got solar panels that don't need light to operate. We've got the war on the gas stoves, more stories on that. Some crazy lady in Connecticut, who I believe was taking pictures to sell to people, children, but they tried to put a gag order on her story. She was a multimillionaire doing this, taking pictures. So they tried to hide that case. We're going to look into that because I believe that has to do with these rings. And what else happened? An update on the family in California that died in the mountains. They supposedly all died of dehydration, but they were all found within feet of one another. Dehydration doesn't work like that. They would be scattered miles. So those are the stories that we have for tomorrow. I love each and every one of you guys, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care and be safe.